Douglas Mulhall coming down in 3, 2, and 1.
Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
And welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. On this episode, could we live longer and better if the damage done by hidden stress could be reversed? We're going to get into some stories from doctors, patients, scientists who are reversing and preventing damage to the heart. You heard me correctly, reversing damage to the heart and body, and in so doing are discovering the nature of longevity. And Douglas Mulhall is with us. He is a biotech company co-founder, popular science author and journalist, researcher at several universities, and he develops buildings that are safe for human health, which have won several international awards. He's also a former co-founder and CEO of the ICTV national TV and radio network in Ukraine, and a documentary filmmaker. He's worked in Asia, Europe, South and North America, and he is the author of Our Molecular Future, Has Heart Disease Been Cured?, Calcium Bomb, the nanobacteria link to heart disease and cancer, and his latest, Discovering the Nature of Longevity. Douglas Mulhall, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Richard, I'm great, and it is finally great to be talking to you again.
You're eating obviously much better than I am and taking much better care of yourself, because you remembered that 15 years ago we spoke on when I was on another radio station, and we were talking about your first book, Our Molecular Future, about artificial intelligence, and all of that has come to pass.
Yeah, and it's almost to the day, Richard, 15 years ago when we did the interview, and you're absolutely right. A lot of this has come to pass, and I have to say that what we're going to be talking about today actually came out of the research on that book 15 years ago. So it's a very interesting time to be talking about this, and I would like to congratulate you for being the first Canadian broadcaster to cover this particular topic that we're going to be talking about. So good on you.
Ah, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Discovering the Nature of Longevity. Let's start with this. I don't know, is it a relatively new field when we're talking about nutraceuticals? Is that a relatively new field?
No. Nutraceuticals are a nutraceutical is something that basically it's a type of supplement, and it's chemicals that come from food to make a long story longer, as they say. So the idea of using supplements, of course, has been around for decades and decades and decades. The thing that is new is that you'll hear quite frequently people from the conventional medical care system saying there's no proof that they work. There's been no clinical trials with nutraceuticals, so we really don't know anything. Well, that's not true anymore. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov in the United States and you put in into the clinical trial nutraceuticals, you'll come up with dozens and dozens and dozens of clinical trials, some of which have been completed and have shown very specific results. So the science is beginning to really be proven in a very specific way. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. I want to emphasize, as you said at the top of the program, people are getting better. And they're getting better in ways that the normal standard of care hasn't been able to achieve. It's not to say that the normal standard of care is bad. It just leaves off at a certain point. And that's where this approach is leading from.
So let's talk about the hidden killer, which is, well, stress. Why does stress, or how does stress, let's say, put a limit on how long we live?
Well, when most people think about stress, they think about the normal type of, emotional stress, psychological stress, stress at work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is absolutely valid. And it's part of this, but it's not the whole story, because there are two other types of stress that I focus on in the book, and there are hundreds of studies that demonstrate the impacts of this. The first is biochemical stress, or chemical stress, that's created by toxic chemicals that get into our body, and toxic metals. And the second type of stress is infection, is stress that is caused by low-grade infection. Now, in both cases, the interesting thing about this stress is you don't notice it, even though it starts from birth. So this process is starting to attack us right from the moment that we're born, but we don't really notice it usually, unless we get an autoimmune disease, until we're into our 30s. And by that time, the process has gone from being very low grade to something that starts to produce symptoms. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is actually quite simple. It accumulates. So these metals that get into you actually start to build up and build up and build up until their effects start to become noticeable. And it's the same with low-grade infections. And by low-grade infections, I mean really plain stuff like, for example, gingivitis, the stuff that causes bad breath, and gum disease, and stuff like the bacteria that a lot of us have inside us but doesn't harm us, but sometimes causes stomach ulcers. Both of these bacterium have been associated with the triggering of heart disease. That's not to say they're the cause, but when you hear about these single causes, that's not the core of the problem, and the single solutions aren't the core of the solution. These build up together, and they are known as total stress load. Now, in conventional medicine, and even in alternative medicine, this is a relatively new area, total stress load. The methods of calculating total stress load are still not well developed, but what is being learned is that it's the combined effect of all these things together that create this problem. I call it hidden stress because, as I said, you don't notice it. These are very low levels. If you do a blood test, for example, for these metals, you will find, well, it usually falls within what's known as the reference level, or the accepted level. The only problem is it's measuring the metals in the blood. Well, that's not where the metals accumulate. They accumulate in your tissue. And so these diagnostics are completely missing it. It's the same thing with these infections.
So one of the culprits we're told for heart disease is cholesterol. Are you suggesting that it may have more to do with things like iron?
Cholesterol is a really funny thing. There's a war on about cholesterol. Is it the culprit or isn't it the culprit? Well, actually, the really interesting thing is that cholesterol is a culprit, but it's not the ordinary kind of cholesterol. And this is a very important thing for people to see. It's actually the cholesterol that is converted into bad cholesterol by something called oxidative stress. Now, this oxidative stress is really important to understanding this whole cycle that I write about, because all of these underlying stresses, like infection, like heavy metals, like emotional stress, they all produce the same result inside us. And it's this oxidative stress. A lot of people have heard about oxidative stress because they see antioxidants in their foods. They see them advertised in their cereals, all these antioxidants. But what in fact is this oxidative stress? Well, actually, it's a good thing, believe it or not. Oxidative stress is a balance in our body, and our cells use oxidative stress to protect themselves from things like infection. So in its balanced state, oxidative stress is a perfectly normal and perfectly good thing. The problem is that all of these other stresses that come into us and affect us ruin the balance. And when that happens, oxidative stress gets out of control and starts to provoke an inflammatory response, an immune response. And that response is the same if you're overstressed emotionally or psychologically or from these metals or from these infections. It's all the same type of response. And that immune response becomes chronic. So the normal, healthy, inflammatory response that helps you fix yourself when you've been cut or you have a short-term injury turns against you. The body turns against you when this total stress load forces you into a chronic mode. And that's the basis of the problem. So when you get back to the cholesterol is actually converted by this oxidative stress process. And that's the problem. So that's why, for example, a lot of people with high cholesterol never have any heart problems, and other people with low cholesterol have serious health problems, because it's the stuff that gets converted that is really the problem.
So it seems like, I don't know, 70%, 80, I'm pulling a number out of the air. I don't know what it is, but a very high percentage of North American adults are placed on these statins. My brother was on a statin, and he just finally said enough. He couldn't deal with the side effects. So it seems like they're going about this the wrong way.
Well, let me tell you a story about the right way, because this is what your program's all about, sort of not walking the trodden path, yes, and yet ending up with a positive result, which I totally respect. And I'm going to give you a great example of this right now. Peter Bartelli. So Peter Bartelli was a long-haul commercial pilot with Continental and United Airlines. And he was 4 years from retirement, and he flunked his FAA medical exam. And they grounded him. So there he was 4 years from retirement. He was going to lose 50% of his pension. He was going to lose the love of his life, which was flying. How many times have you heard this story with people in different professions who end up with this? And it was all because his stent that he'd had inserted had clogged up. And replacing the stent or putting in another stent put him on the too high risk list. So the FAA told him, Peter, sorry, you're done. You're done. So Peter Bartelli did something unusual. He didn't accept it. He did not accept the FAA ruling, and he fired his cardiologist. And he went to another cardiologist who is quite remarkably a conservative cardiologist in Florida. He was at the time the vice president of the American Heart Association chapter in Florida. And this cardiologist told him two things. He said, first of all, I want you to change your diet. And secondly, I want you to try what was at the time. This was many years ago. What was at the time an experimental nutraceutical therapy that was known as Nanobac TX. And it was developed, and this is important, by an emergency room specialist and family medicine specialist by the name of Gary Mazot. And Gary had been working for 20 years in emergency rooms and watching all these heart patients drop dead, and he was really getting tired of it. So he spent several years studying what at the time was unusual, which was these nutraceuticals and what their effects were and how they had synergistic effects with the current standard of care of the time. And as a result of that, he developed a formula, a compound that he put together. And this was the compound that Peter Bartelli tried, because his cardiologist, his new cardiologist, had used it with a number of patients and had actually published a study showing that their calcium scores, in other words, the measure of the hardening of the arteries, had been reduced by this. Okay, so Peter tried it and he changed his diet. So I want to emphasize he did these two things at the same time. Several months later, he passes the FAA test with flying colors. The FAA doctors were astonished. They thought that the original stress test had been faulty. That's how astonished they were. And Peter flew for 10 more years and retired because he wanted to, rather not because he was forced to. And I just spoke to Peter, a few months ago, and he's driving his race car around the track at Sebring. So, he's okay. And that is what this is all about. This is all about people who've hit the end of the road with standard care. It's not to say the standard care is bad. It just leaves off at a certain point. And this was the result that he got. And I want to emphasize, this is not a lark. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of patients. And also I want to emphasize cardiologists, integrative cardiologists who have used this type of approach, combining this nutraceutical with nutrition, and have had similar results with their patients. I want to emphasize also, Richard, I'm not a physician. I'm a science journalist. I have founded a biotech company, but I'm not giving medical advice here. I'm reporting what these patients and what these doctors have discovered. And that's why we call it discovering the nature of longevity, because what they're getting at here is really a key to the nature of healthy longevity.
What is in the Nanobac TX? If it's a nutraceutical, what is?
Actually the ingredients are on the label, and you can actually see it online, and it's also in an appendix to the book. So there's a whole list of them. They're not unusual. What's unusual about them is several things, and I'm glad you asked this question, because there's a methodology that's involved with this as well. So it's the mix and the relative proportions of the mix, which, by the way, is proprietary and is not revealed on the label. And it is combined also with a chemical that grabs the heavy metals in you. The word chelate is to grab, and I just said the magic trigger word, at which point half the doctors who are listening will turn the radio off because they think that chelation doesn't work. Well, that's not the case anymore, and the clinical trials have shown it. And so he took these two things, this chelating chemical and about 7 or 8 different nutraceuticals and vitamins. He put them together in an oral formula. It used to include a suppository, but people didn't like that too much, so he went to oral. And there are several innovations tied in with this. The first one is this stuff gets eaten up in the stomach if you just take it, unprotected. So it needs a special coating called an enteric coating, and it's a patented coating that comes from only a few companies, and it allows you to bypass the stomach and release this stuff into the intestine where it can get into the bloodstream. So that's the first innovation. And that only became possible, actually. That's why they switched from the suppository. That only became possible, several years ago when the enteric coatings were actually perfected. So this is pretty high technology in that respect, and now it's commonly used. The second thing is, unlike other so-called chelation and many other heart therapies, it's administered at night just before you go to bed. It's 8 capsules. So at night, your body, surprisingly enough, your metabolism actually doesn't really slow down. It goes into repair mode. Mm. And that's very important, because that means that these nutraceuticals are actually supporting the repair mode. And when you think of it, I mean, that's what you're doing. You're resting and you're repairing yourself. So doesn't it make sense to help that process along? So this is actually helping the body to repair itself. This is a key aspect of it. And I want to say again, this is only one example of many, many, many therapies that I cover in the book. By the way, I'm not paid to promote a single one of them. So I just want to be clear on that. But there are many others, and we can talk about that as we get a little more into the show.
If these nutraceuticals are based in part on ingredients we find in food, you mentioned antioxidants, and we always talk about blueberries as an antioxidant. But if that is the case, is it difficult to get funding for proper studies, since you can't patent these ingredients, right? So pharmaceuticals aren't necessarily, or are they? Maybe I'm wrong here, but I wouldn't think that pharmaceuticals would be as interested in a nutraceutical as they might be in their own patented drug formula.
The answer to that is the groundwork is changing. The short answer used to be yes. It's really tough. the answer today is it's tough, but it's not as tough as it used to be. And that's why some of these nutraceuticals are going into clinical trial and have been in clinical trial. But here's the problem. The regulatory regime around the world is set up to look at individual chemicals or drugs having individual effects. Well, that's not the way the human body works. So when you have a combined group of drugs or a combined group of nutraceuticals, it becomes much harder to show the cause and effect the way that the regulatory regime is set up. And that's the tough part. So you won't see many clinical trials being funded that have more than, a total of 3 drugs or ingredients at the same time. And even that is relatively rare these days. So you'll see vitamin K2, vitamin C, you'll see these things, and occasionally you'll see them put together, but you won't see the combination that is used in, chelation therapy, whether it's intravenous, which includes the use of different vitamins along with a chelating chemical, or with these nutraceuticals. And that is the real challenge. So basically what's happening is the cardiologists are saying, hey, this stuff works. We know that. But there have been some clinical studies, not clinical trials, not the double-blinded randomized trials, but clinical studies that show that patients are improving. But getting through the regulatory regime with a combined product like this is almost impossible today. So the result of that is that these guys have taken a different path, and instead of trying to apply to the FDA for a drug, they've just used the generally regarded as safe GRAS application, which is used by the FDA to say this stuff looks like it doesn't harm you. It's called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And then they classify that also as a nutraceutical. And nutraceuticals don't come under the same burden, but this is the big but. They can't make a claim of treating anything.
Right.
That's why you see nutraceuticals saying improves heart health, that you can't say reverses heart disease. If you do that, the FDA is on you. And this, in fact, has happened to a number of these nutraceuticals, and they had to change their claims. So you'll see this quite frequently in the ads if you watch carefully. So that's the answer to your question. Yes, but the groundwork is changing. The combined groups are very hard to test according to regulatory regimes, and they can't make the claims that the cardiologists are actually seeing are happening.
Douglas, we'll take a quick time out, back with more on discovering the nature of longevity. Stay with us. What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined. We're back with Douglas Mulhall, who is a biotech company co-founder, popular science author, journalist, researcher, and his latest book is Discovering the Nature of Longevity. Previously, he authored Our Molecular Future, Has Heart Disease Been Cured? Calcium Bomb, the nanobacterial link to heart disease and cancer. Are these nutraceuticals in effect, because they are based on food as medicine? Are they confirming things that we've known since ancient times?
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't answer your question earlier, Richard. That's exactly the point. So First of all, because these metals and these low-grade infections have been with us ever since Homo sapiens started walking the earth, your body has, gotten systems together to get rid of them, to get rid of some of the heavy metals. There are processes for that, and to combat these low-grade infections. The problem is when the total stress load builds up and your body is overwhelmed. The food-based stuff can't get rid of it, and in fact, often contributes to it. For example, we've known for a long time Egyptian mummies and Ice Age humans that were frozen, their bodies were frozen in the Alps that have been discovered. They have one thing in common. There's little white lines tracing where their arteries used to be. Those white lines are hardening of the arteries. That's calcium phosphate that built up. So these people died at a relatively young age. They still had heart disease. Now, why is that? That's because, number one, grains that we started cultivating, guess what? They're great at uptaking metals from the soil. These metals are in our water, they're in our soil, they're all over the place. So they actually concentrate them. And so as soon as we started doing that, this stuff, started getting into us in a rather big way.
We should have stayed hunter-gatherers.
Well, yeah, but the thing is this. The other thing is fires, smoke from fires. Guess what? Smoke from fires, and that includes, by the way, all these wildfires that have been happening around the world, in Western Canada, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what? It's laden with heavy metals. So this is provoking this stress response. So you can see how air quality becomes a really important factor. So to keep to the topic before we get into air quality, so yes, the nutraceuticals are a concentration of the types of naturally occurring foods that allow our body to get rid of this stuff. The problem is they need to be more focused. And that's why you have these products out there, like I just spoke of. That's why you have intravenous chelation. And even those have actually not been able to get at one really important thing, and that is this. And for the people who are just listening, I'm flexing my hands here. And I just want to do an experiment for people in the audience so they understand clearly what this is all about. If you take your hand like this, I hope you can see it, yes, and you pinch the skin on the back of your hand and then you let it go. Mm-hmm. So if you're an old guy like me, it takes a second to go down.
Right.
If you're 25, it goes right back. Now, why is that? Well, that's because not of collagen in your skin. All this talk about collagen. Collagen strengthens your skin. It doesn't give it elasticity. It's called elastic fiber or elastin fiber. And this fiber is not only in your skin, but it's also in your arteries and in your tendons. So basically, every breath you take and every step you make is powered by elastin fiber. Now, guess what happens when oxidative stress attacks your body? The first thing it attacks is the elastic fiber in your arteries, in your tendons. And by the way, that's why you start to sag. It's not the collagen that's sagging. It's the elastic. And that's why you start to get wrinkles, because this oxidative stress is attacking the elastin. And then something weird happens. And I've talked to the world's top authorities on this, and they don't understand why it happens still. But when you hit the age of 30, more or less, your body stops assembling elastin fiber, which is a very, very long-lived fiber, by the way. But it does get damaged, and your body keeps replacing it until, guess what? It doesn't anymore around the age of 30. Isn't it strange that around the age of 30, you start feeling a little more tired and you start getting wrinkles, right? There's a correlation there, and that's what's happening. So the problem is that all these nutraceuticals, all the chelation therapy and everything else, have had some success at reversing the damage to this, but You really need to have a very, very precise attack to what's happening to the elastic fiber itself. That has been discovered. It has been discovered how to do that. It was discovered by two scientists at Clemson University in South Carolina, Dr. Naren Vivahari and Dr. Charles Rice, who I am proud to say are my co-founders of Elastrin Therapeutics, one of the companies, one of only 3 companies in the world that is focusing on repairing this elastin damage. And I've got nothing but good news about this, because these 3 or 4 companies that have done this are all approaching it in a different way. One is working on skin. One is working on aneurysms that we can talk about in a moment. Mm-hmm. One is working on the whole systemic problem in the arteries, but they all have one thing in common. They are reversing the damage to the elastin, and they are kickstarting the elastin repair process. You can't imagine how important this is. And you can also see why a lot of the heart drugs that are around today, they haven't touched this stuff. All they're doing is they're touching the symptoms. So this is a game changer. This is a paradigm shift in how we're looking at this treatment. And what Dr. Vivahari discovered was that a naturally based chemical that comes from tree bark and the skin of grapes and a lot of other fruits, it's called it's called pentagallyl glucose, and it is a polyphenol. A lot of people have heard of polyphenols.
Yes.
Well, these polyphenols restore elastin. They kickstart the elastin repair process. Now, the chelation removes the hardening that happens, that starts with the damaged elastin, because your body's trying to wall off that damage. So they start to calcify. So first you get rid of the calcification, and then this polyphenol actually restores, it kickstarts this process of the elastin to repair itself. And right now, today, in clinical trial for aneurysms are these bulges in the artery, okay? There are these bulges in the artery that when they burst, you've got a huge problem and a deadly one. Mm. And there has been no drug that can reverse this or cure it until today. So when the polyphenol is directly applied to the aneurysm, as it is today in clinical trials, guess what happens? That bulge goes like this. The elastic repairs itself and pulls in the bulge and repairs itself. It's extraordinary what's happening. And that's being done by a company that I'm not involved in, but it's Nectaro Medical, and you can look it up. This is all in the book, by the way. Our company, Elastrin Therapeutics, is focusing on the whole system. And the way we're doing that is Professor Charles Rice developed an antibody that, oddly enough, is specific. Normally, antibodies go after, infections and stuff like that. This antibody is specific for a protein that is exposed when the elastin is damaged. So it hooks right on to the damaged elastin and delivers the drug payload. And so the preclinical results have been astonishing. We've seen, complete regression of the damage to the elastin throughout the arterial tree. And this isn't in clinical use yet, but we're hoping to be in clinical trial in 2 years. So in the book, what I do is I say, here's what's happening right now that is available broadly, these nutraceuticals, the intravenous chelation. Here's what is almost here, like I just mentioned with the aneurysms. And here's what's coming down the pipe, which is the stuff like the antibodies that do the very precise targeting. All 3 of those are covered in the book.
All right, we'll take another time out. I guess, the book is called Discovering the Nature of Longevity, but these elastins may be the key to longevity. I guess, short of lengthening our telomeres, elastin, the key to longevity. Back with more of our discussion right after this. What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined. Douglas Mulhall is with us. Calcify.com, our molecularfuture.com. The new book is Discovering the Nature of Longevity. You mentioned aneurysms, and I mentioned this in an email. And one of the reasons the Mighty Aphrodite was listening so intently when you were with my coast-to-coast colleague George Norrie a couple of weeks back was my mother-in-law had an aneurysm. She has aneurysm. She has a thoracic aortic aneurysm. That was repaired. In fact, it was performed by, it was either Dr. Tyrone David, and then she had the abdominal aneurysm that was repaired by, I believe, Dr. Claudio Cina, one of whom is now the Pope's doctor. And I think she's written up in the medical journals this procedure because the actual procedures that were performed on her were named after Dr. Cina and Dr. Tyrone David. And so she still has a 5-millimeter abdominal aneurysm, which they keep a close eye on. So,
and she had major surgery.
Yes.
So you got to keep in mind, so this approach that I'm talking about, the one that's in clinical trial right now, is delivered through the artery through a minimally invasive tube that is even smaller than a stent, and is delivered over a period of an hour, and they pull it out and you're done. You're done.
Wow.
So this is, yes, this type of surgery that you're talking about has been useful in certain cases, but the aneurysm is still there. It's not, the elastic isn't repaired.
Correct.
And so that's not, so I don't mean to downplay the importance of what she went through with the surgery, but this is a totally different level. It's going to be more affordable, less invasive. It's just a totally different thing.
Right. Well, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
20 years ago.
And by the way, Einstein died of an aneurysm.
Ah. So she's 86. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't. What about, she's on a whole host of, blood thinners and different, all these different medications. It doesn't affect any of that?
Well, actually, the idea will be to get rid of them. That's the idea. We haven't gone far enough. I say we, they haven't gone far enough in the clinical trials to know if, in fact, that's going to happen. But I will tell you that Dr. Jim Roberts out of Toledo, Ohio, and a number of other physicians who have been working with the nutraceutical and chelation and diet approach have seen, especially their diabetic patients, go off some of their meds. So that's not to say drop your meds right now and run to this stuff, but there are very promising signs that people are able to get off at least some of their meds when this combined approach, and I would like to emphasize combined approach of exercise, nutrition, and nutraceuticals is used. So that's the answer to the question. And by the way, Richard, I want to thank George Norrie again publicly for his great service in introducing this whole concept. And I also want to just briefly apologize to him for calling him Art twice. Art Bell was the guy who started the show and first interviewed me, and unfortunately died of a heart condition.
Yes.
And the reason I called him George Art was because I was thinking during the show, if Art had had access to some of this, he'd still be with us. So apologies to George, but there you go.
I'm sure he took that as a compliment. Who wouldn't? I could, Art Bell, I could have listened to him read from the telephone directory and had been totally enthralled. He was that kind of a broadcaster. We just have a few minutes here, and of course, we're just giving you the kind of the helicopter view of what's in the book. But what you mentioned, you kind of teased the stuff that's coming down the pipe. So blow my socks off. What is coming down the pipe?
Well, just for starters, there's a company that is targeting the protein that causes cholesterol to shift from ordinary cholesterol to bad cholesterol due to oxidative stress. Now, that is really interesting. So that's an example of what's coming down the pipe. There's our technology is coming down the pipe, with this systemic approach to restoring the elastic. On the really drastic side, my friend, I think I call her my friend, Martine Rothblatt, who is the highest paid female executive in the United States and chairman of United Therapeutics, has developed what's known as a xenoheart, which is a grown heart. And they had their first implant into a human last year. And this is for people who are just so far gone that nothing's going to help them. And so the xenoheart transplants have finally been performed, and they kept the patient going for a while. Unfortunately, they died of something that was unrelated. But that's really groundbreaking stuff. So at almost every level, whether it's converting bad cholesterol back to good cholesterol, or replacing a heart, or targeting damaged elastin, this stuff is either in clinical trial or going to be in clinical trial in the next 2 to 5 years. So we're really I can't emphasize enough. This is all ending up as personalized medicine. And this is a quantum shift in the type of one-size-fits-all medicine that we've been looking at until now. And to be clear, this is not your doctor's fault, the one-size-fits-all. It's a standardized healthcare system that is one-size-fits-all. Doctors have seen these effects on their patients forever, but they're stuck with this system, and no one's going to be happier than them when some of this stuff comes in.
Heart disease remains the #1 killer, and you look at the healthcare. Obviously, there's the human cost, which is incalculable. But if we put a dollar figure on healthcare budgets, so for example, in Ontario, our healthcare budget is growing as the population ages, as heart disease increases. It is becoming an untenable situation. It takes such a big chunk out of the budget now. It's almost becoming, well, it is. It's already unsustainable.
And not to mention for the patient who has copay. So, I know we've got the system in Canada, but, when you get disabled, all the inconvenience of going to the doctor, of, wheelchairs and all that stuff, it's, there's copay there. Mm-hmm. And so this is starting to pile up on patients as well. And guess what? Some of this stuff just stops working for you. So I know a lot of people who've gone to the US for operations because it's just not working for them anymore. So there's this huge element of the cost to the patient. And I want to emphasize something here. These things that I'm talking about are actually quite affordable by comparison. People might balk at them because they're not covered by universal insurance. But when you look at the copay provisions along with them, which a study has done in the United States, what they found was that the total overall costs are 30 to 70% lower with these types of approaches in, for example, peripheral artery disease. So it's a big affordability factor as well, Richard.
Discovering the nature of longevity, restoring the heart and body by targeting hidden stress. Douglas Mulhall, a great pleasure reconnecting with you after 15 years, and we're going to do it again soon because we're going to revisit our original interview all those years ago when Our Molecular Future came out and has since been proven 100% correct. Douglas.
Richard, thank you very much for having me. And I want to say the book is published in Canada. And also hit the #1 spot in 7 Amazon categories. So we're really happy about that in the US.
Fantastic.
And so it's a Canadian book. And it's great to have a Canadian program focusing on it. Thank you very much.
Discovering the nature of longevity.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.